Hi, and welcome to the TrainRight podcast. Today's guest, we have Levi Younger. Levi is a Rolfer, a form of somatic therapy, who lives in Bend, Oregon. He ran track and cross country at Portland State University and started running shorter ultra races, these 50-kilometer and mountain races, in his home state of Alaska after graduating. His interest in Rolfing and somatic therapy started in 2015 after he broke his thoracic vertebrae and his back playing recreational hockey. His search for a solution landed him in a Rolfer's office after trying countless other modalities to remedy his pain. Levi opened his practice in Boulder, Colorado in 2017, and he has worked with countless runners from elite level and ultra mountain runners to Olympians to average Joes. He's currently pursuing a master's degree in clinical counseling from Oregon State University in Bend, Oregon, and will be opening a practice there in 2022, combining somatic therapy, coaching, and clinical counseling. So we'll get into kind of how I met Levi. But Levi, thank you so much for joining us and welcome.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm glad to be on here.
Yeah, thanks for putting up with the the intro. But
Yeah,
yeah, so okay, so I mean, I met you, let's see, back in what, 2000, I think 17, 2018.
yeah, somewhere in there. I think like the winter of
Yeah.
2017.
Yeah. So, I mean, we'll get more into this, and this is my first introduction to Rolfing, so I guess that's kind of where I want to start. Can you tell me what is Rolfing?
Yeah, so Rolfing is a form of somatic therapy, and really the kind of the genesis is this doctor in the 30s and 40s, 50s named Ida Rolf. Um, Came up with this really ingenious way of looking at the body and working with the body that was very much hands-on, um, kind of doing, what appears to be massage, but is more focused on like tapping in your nervous system, working with kind of your fascia, muscles, and really like in her eyes, kind of helping people with imbalances and helping them kind of live their best life in their body. So she kind of came up with this whole way of looking at the body that was kind of different than a lot of like the massage therapy or even rehab stuff that was going on in kind of the 50s and 60s when she started to really put this together. And she just started a school of what she called, well, they ended up being called Rolfing. So that's kind of where it started, and that's kind of how it entered the world.
And so, I mean, I typically, when you first, I mean, we can get into kind of like how we met. But when I think you came to me, I had this pretty bad accident and a series of injuries, and I was kind of going down the traditional route of seeking physical therapists, and of course, I mean, I've talked. I talk very highly of the PTs that I've worked with, because I felt like it was more of not only just working with the injuries and like range of motion, but it was also more psychological and all of these things. But I was still dealing a lot with like pain management, and these I kind of met you a bit later into my recovery. But I was still having a lot of trouble. Like, I was learning how to walk again, and I like it, kind of this inexplicable pain and favoring of one side, even though I technically didn't kind of have an issue anymore. Like, everything seemed fine from a medical standard, but I wasn't able to kind of get work past this barrier that I had. And I mean, I remember I was just kind of like looking for more resources, but kind of coming up empty handed. And then I thought it was like me. And then you messaged me out of the blue and like told me about Rolfing. I was just like, what is this? Like, I honestly thought it had a bad reputation for like being super painful. And yeah, I guess.
Yeah, well, that's a lot of stuff you said that is really kind of jogging my memory because it's been a while, and but it is. It's, I think, one of those things that I hear, you know, um, key points of your story. I hear in a lot of other people's stories too, and that can kind of boil down to like, well, everything's fine according to, like my x-rays, and those are all good, like my PT says I'm looking really good, but I'm just not feeling good. Like there's just this kind of inexplicable something, and it starts to kind of make you think like, is there something wrong with me? And and people can do that. They go to a chiropractor or a PT, and nothing against them, but maybe they're like, okay, this is going to fix your hip, it'll make it better, this drill. And when it doesn't, you can have this kind of like, well, maybe I'm the person, like this injury is so big or something so wrong that like it's unfixable. And
Yeah.
like so I think I kind of heard a lot of that. I watched a video you did, and I was just like, man, like I'm here, like why don't I try to get, take a stab at it? And I was like really amazed. You messaged me back. You're like, yeah, that sounds great. Like what? So I was excited because I was like, oh my gosh, like this like high level athletes willing to take like a chance on this kind of fringe thing. And I think even that kind of points to like, maybe to where you're at with, your injuries and stuff, that you're willing to kind of just be like, I don't care what this is, even if it sounds kind of like might be painful, I'm gonna go for it. So that was
Hmm.
interesting to me.
Well, I mean, I think we've always had a pretty good balance. I think you come, maybe this is going to sound funny, but I come more from a hard science background, and you come more from this like ooey gooey, like like Hillary, like actually listen to your emotions and what they're telling you, and not like what the science says. So like you actually challenged me in a good way, but I think
Sure.
the reason I was able to come to you is because yes, I have that hard science background. I have a master's degree in neuroscience and physiology. I understand how the body works, but then I also have this understanding of human psyche, and like the injury really taught me that emotions are real, and
Yeah.
pain is real. And a big part of pain is psychological, meaning that we don't completely understand the mechanisms behind it. And a lot of it, and like I come from, like I learned a lot in neuroscience that like what you think, like thoughts can be real, and you can like manifest it into like a physical thing in your body. And so I think that's actually um kind of what allowed me to be like, okay, like this is real, like let's figure out a way. I might not like it, but like let's figure out a way to work through this. And
Right.
then I was on your table.
Well, I think that really points to some of the areas of, and again, this isn't really in so much like Rolfing as, we're starting to talk about just um, the general, like the era, like the frontier of like rehab and PT and all that kind of stuff. Um, what we're looking at is like pain is this kind of crazy thing that honestly not a lot of people understand. If you listen to some of the best and brightest pain researchers, and for some reason they all seem to come out of Australia. A lot of what they'll tell you is like, we don't really know, and again, you have a master's in neuroscience, like, so the idea of me being able to teach you anything at first to me it was like nuts. I'm like, there's no way that I can possibly say anything that the person doesn't already know, heaps more than me. Like she could just like, and yet, as we're talking here, it's it's clear that like I had something to offer, and I think the biggest piece of that is exactly what you just said. Like, not only do thoughts and feelings, like all like have, like a physical component, they always do. There's always a physical component. I think this may be, I've given this example to people pretty often, and it's if a really good example of this is sexual arousal, right? You can go from
Yeah.
having this thought, and this cascade of stuff happens sometimes very quickly, and suddenly your body is like doing stuff kind of outside of your conscious control. You're just like, huh, well, and that's just what I thought. Like that's something that's you literally imagining something in your brain that doesn't exist, and suddenly you have your entire body is doing stuff outside of kind of
Oh
your
my gosh.
conscious control, and you're just like, huh. And that's just like that's like the most obvious example, and but that happens literally all day, 24/7. There is no time that you can kind of like step into your brain only or just into your body. There's always they're communicating because they're the same unit, just different. We've
Yeah.
labeled them different things. So yeah, and I mean that was the thing that really intrigued me, was like getting into that kind of study and being like, huh, we should probably focus on this a little bit. So
Yeah. But so I mean like okay, so I mean I guess so for me particular, I mean I guess we could share a little bit about my story if you think that that's like relevant. But again, I'd just like to kind of like discuss this relationship between psychological and physical pain. And I think from your perspective, it's like it's really interesting like what is pain? Chronic or other, because I feel like I mean as a runner and athletes, I think you running necessarily isn't I mean, it's a little bit painful, right? Like pain management is kind of part of this idea of getting more fit. Intervals aren't comfortable. Running isn't always comfortable. Like running uphill certainly doesn't feel like I wouldn't describe it as feeling great. But like I guess the more comfortable you are with it, it does become that way. But then if you're dealing with a kind of a little injury, there's always this push pull between pain. And yeah, so I guess to kind of like just like talk about this, like what is pain and what is chronic pain from your perspective?
Well, the first thing I want to, kind of touch on is like one, runners to me are some of the most resilient kind of like yeah, it's nuts. Like it seems like a lot of other sports, like running is their punishment, and yet we have an entire sport where people do this for fun. Um, and I've gone on, way too many runs with you where I'm just like, how is she that far ahead? Like she must really enjoy this on a level that I can't even begin to understand. So there, yeah, I think, like it's worth noting that some of the, at least in America, some of like the pioneers of the ultra running world were like former meth heads or these people that have these like just wild stories, and so like their concept of what hurts, what feels good, very skewed, I would say, like so it's kind of I think that's worth noting is because we have this heritage of like it's kind of nuts. Um, but
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, what is pain? I mean, first of all, I'll say like you are asking me, which is kind of nuts. Like I would say like I feel wildly underqualified to answer that question. But what I've gathered, at least from what I've studied, what I've listened to, and kind of what I've seen working with people is yeah, if I break my leg or not, if I'll tear a muscle, it's going to be pretty painful, right? And we assume that like anytime we feel pain, something has to be broken or have to be injured. And what a lot of like the pain neuroscience research shows us is that's not necessarily true. And I want to say that, it doesn't mean that like, you know, there's no such as injuries. I mean, my dad ruptured his Achilles tendon when I was in elementary school. That's a real injury. Like you can't just walk
Yeah.
that off, But what's crazy is he said it wasn't actually that painful, which to me is like, what? Like I've talked to him recently, and he was like, yeah, I mean, it was just uncomfortable because I tried to stand up and I couldn't. He was like, it was actually more painful after all these surgeries and stuff, but the injury itself didn't really hurt. Um,
Huh.
and you get into stuff where certain people will also, they have excruciating pain, and there's not anything that we can like find on like imaging or testing or that shows why they're in pain. And there was this kind of a
Mhm.
cool study, I think I can't remember. It's out of a university in Canada, but they looked at a lot of people with low back pain and or no low back pain, both groups, and then they looked at the imaging from their backs, and they assumed it'd be pretty ordered. Like everyone who's in excruciating pain is going to have some, like lots of like degenerative discs and herniated disc and all that stuff, and
Mhm.
vice versa. And what they found is like there was not a very strong correlation. You had people that were like old and had like horrific looking images, and they were like reported feeling fine and super active. And then you had
Hmm.
on the flip side like really young people who, the imaging of their back was like, man, maybe they have like a little bit of a, like weird curve here, but they're in like excruciating pain all the time. And so like the researchers were just like, what do we do with this? Like this
Yeah.
this this doesn't make any sense. And they've tried to study that a little more, and like I said, there's some pretty good pain science research going on in Australia. But
Yeah.
to me that kind of points out like, no one really knows what pain is, no one really knows what chronic pain is. I would say chronic pain tends to be stuff that sticks around, uh, you know 3 4 weeks and beyond, where it becomes this cycle of something that doesn't really seem to go away and doesn't really seem to
Yeah.
match like a healing. Like, if you injured yourself after about 6 weeks, a lot of things can heal themselves in your body. And so if
Mhm.
it's still painful after 6 weeks, that kind of points to, even to me, like that doesn't make sense. And I think, that might kind of ties into like your story too, of like you were pretty much healed technically and had a lot of
Mhm.
time, and yet still stuff didn't feel very good.
Yeah, and this is the interesting part, and this is kind of like what you taught me a lot, and like conversations I had with my PTs of like, I would look to the literature and be like, okay, bone healing or ligament healing like takes X amount of time. So technically this stuff is quote unquote healed. So that would give me some
Yeah,
confidence.
technically it's good.
Technically it's good. But then I was still having these like, especially on my right side where I had broken my foot and like ruptured a major ligament, like psychologically, I hadn't used that limb for 3 months. And so starting to walk again, I was favoring that side. Like psychologically, I still had an injury. Like I was like timid on that side. And time again, many people that I've run into at like who've told me about injury stories that they've had or injury recovery, they always talk about this idea of confidence, and they talk about this idea of, okay, like I feel not confident anymore. It's like jumping's hard for me if they're dealing with like something with their feet or their knees or their ankles in particular. They're like, I'm having trouble with confidence running downhill, like. And that's not because they're still injured physically, it's because mentally there's this block. And I was dealing with a lot of that because I feel like, especially as runners and with injuries, like you you get this, like, running can be your release, right? And when you can't do the thing that you love, there's all of this like psychological blockage there. Because like you associate, at least for me, like as as a professional runner, I was, my a lot of my self-worth was tied up in being able to run and to compete. And so then when I was having trouble with just walking with a normal gait, like there was a lot of like psychological blocks there. And I mean, yeah, like I'm a neuroscientist, but like the psychological aspect of like kind of like I describe it as like the ooey gooey side of like not the hard science side of neuroscience, like chemistry and biochemistry, but the like how you feel and like the emotions behind the neuronal circuitry. That's, I feel like, where you can actually get blocked the most, and then therefore make the most gains when you kind of work through this stuff. And so it's like what I was working with you, this, I would describe it as pain because I didn't really know what else to describe it as, but it was more of kind of like this psychological block. And I think that's actually really important for injury recovery. And so this is kind of something that's like, how do you propose? Because I mean, now with your new, basically, you're going to combine Rolfing coaching and clinical counseling. And so, like, how do you propose to manage both sides of kind of this injury recovery, managing the um, I don't know, the science with the actual psychology?
Sure. I mean, I think one of the biggest things that I think if anyone, talks to me or, reads some of the literature that I've put out, like I do a lot of like social media stuff. The biggest takeaway is that, this concept that there's like body pain and then there's psychological pain. I think,
Yeah.
or even that there's a body and then there's a mind, and they're like these very distinct, separate entities. Toss that out. That idea that there's black and white, nothing's black and white. It's very much all shades of gray. So, and I find myself talking like that all the time. It's part of our culture. We've kind of accepted this very like my body's over here, and then I live up my mind, and that's just kind of become our
Mhm.
cultural stuff. So understanding that it's ingrained in us to see ourselves as these very distinct entities, and we need to kind of overcome that, and that's huge. Like that's great. And to overcome, years of training and cultural like messaging. um but something that like kind of you just mentioned that is really important is, yeah, like that idea of, oh my gosh, like I'm a runner, and specifically for you, like I'm a professional runner, like this is my livelihood, this is my identity, is wrapped up in
Mhm.
this injury. And that's important because, not only does it, like we're saying, like, there's a psychological component, but again, there is a physical component to psychological stuff all the time, every time, right? So as we kind of dive into what is pain, it's not just like, oh, I have this cut. The nerves are kind of sending signals to my brain of like, this is pain. Really, those nerves are sending signals of this is dangerous.
Yeah.
It's interpreted with the big soup of everything that's going on in your brain and history, identity, and then it comes out, and that's where we can have people who are like in the middle of a race, or like my body hurts so bad. Oh, and then I just flipped the switch because I imagined winning the race and I really wanted to do that, and suddenly it felt like it all went away. So it's cool is
Hmm.
when we start to understand how intertwined our body and our mind are and how pain arises out of that relationship together, we start to see that like it is vitally important to understand that your identity, is being compromised because of this pain, like this injury
Yeah.
in the sense of whatever, and it's fostering more pain. So a good example of that is someone um, who comes in with, okay, I'll give you this. I went to my grandma's house for Thanksgiving a couple years ago, and she's old, and she's been told for years that her back is terrible and that she's just like basically she's an old crippled lady, and she's telling me this story, and I'm sitting there kind of like, okay, and she can barely move in her table, and I put this like pen down because I was writing something down. It falls off the table in a fraction of a second. In between telling me how immobilized she is, she can't do anything, she bends over from a seated position, picks it up off the ground, puts it back on, and goes back to tell me how much she can't move. It's like she didn't even realize how incredible and how mobile she is. She just did it and then put it back. And I just want to be like, so grandma, you can't move, but like, what was that? Like these stories that we're told by the medical professionals who are just maybe they're having a bad day and just kind of let something slip, they become ingrained in us, and the story we tell ourselves comes ingrained in us, and that has like a kind of a flowing relationship with our pain. So as you're talking about kind of how you couldn't move on your side, how much of that is like, yeah, maybe in the beginning it did hurt. Like you're like, my right side really does, like it does have this kind of like immobilized feeling because, you were in cast and had pins and needles and, just all this stuff like keeping you immobilized. But, I think something we talked about in the beginning was like, like, have you tried using it? And like, yeah, I did it. But no, like, have you like tried and had success and then felt that confidence restored in that area of your body? And you were like, I don't know, what are you talking about? Like, I remember you being very like, you're nuts. Like, what confidence? Like, and so it's one of those things where like I think that combination of some of the stuff we were doing, just like like having conversations while doing a lot of like like physical hands-on work, like I was saying, like that massage style looking thing, but
Hmm.
also having these conversations around how you're actually feeling and connecting you know, that sense of feeling inside you with what's going on. I think, again, almost in some ways, like fostering that reconnection of the mind and the body together and realizing that it is a cohesive unit. And to me, I think
Yeah.
that's kind of what we're really, like excites me, not only about Rolfing, but any of these emerging, PT and chiropractic schools that are like, we should probably do better at this.
Yeah, I mean, and this is also something I felt like, ironically, it's like one of the reasons why I've gotten along so well with my PT people is like they'd point me to like the physical thing to do, right? The exercises. But then there was also a personal connection there. And so like and I actually so I think I was able so I could like, they would ask me how I was doing and like, like I could, this is the kind of the counseling aspect of it. And like I cried many times in your office, I think, as many times as I tried, like I tried to
Yeah.
like it was probably started as like angry crying. I was like, no, I'm not gonna do it. And then I was like pissed because I was crying. And then like you were just being like, okay, like Hillary, what's really going on here? And I think you encouraged that part of me to be able to kind of show up in like regardless of how I was feeling, like whether it was angry or sad, and show up in those emotions and have those be just as valid as the pain that I was going through. And that helped me in other kind of like the physical rehab of my injuries, like actually doing the exercises, like the traditional PT stuff. But that became more powerful because I was able to also acknowledge the psychological stuff that was also going on, like these kind of like barriers that I had. And I mean, I think with you, when I was on, when like we were actually going through like the therapy, like I was having a lot of, you did a lot of manipulation with like kind of like the skin. It's almost kind of like this like pinching because there's a ton of your sensory neurons. Like I like to say that people think of like, your central nervous system as like your brain, and the peripheral nervous system like encapsulated safely in your spinal column and cord. But really, your sensory neurons are accessible in your like everywhere. That's like
Yeah,
you touch your skin and that's them. Like you are full of sensory neurons. And so you're actually, I like to think of your peripheral nervous system like your skin. Like that's where all of these ion channels and these things and these receptors are kind of like located. They're right there. And so if you find a way to kind of manipulate them, and I remember you were doing that a lot with kind of just like touch or like, like I don't know, creating more space between I don't even know exactly what you're doing. You can explain it to me. It's because
oh,
like I can think about it from like a scientific perspective, but like basically for me, how I thought about it is like on the scar side of my foot, a lot of those nerves were dead. And so it was painful because they were growing and I was like kind of learning to like reconnect, making those connections again, right? There's a lot of scar tissue there. So I feel like you're trying to kind of like create more awareness um in order for those pathways to be quote unquote like opened up again, if that makes any sense.
totally.
And yeah, so for me, it's like you're kind of creating like micro stresses at those points to tell my body like physically like okay, like this area needs to be woken up again. But that's like more of like the scientific way, but there also has to be like a psychological pathway that's opened up again. And for me, it was important to kind of like bring awareness to this part of my body and be like, okay, like it was injured before, but like, he does this. And then you had me like rock around the room and like it would feel differently because I was like aware of that part of my body in a different way. And that was just kind of mind blowing for me because it was like, I feel like I was just like reconceptualizing like this idea of like injury and like everything that I knew about like, injuries in science and like how the body worked, I felt was just kind of like like I knew it,
Yeah,
like the mind is powerful, but it like felt different.
sure. Like, I think that's really, like that's one high praise, so thanks. But one of the things that really interests me, and something that really kind of stoked a lot of fires early on when I was like going through my own kind of training. And yeah, I guess I forgot to mention that, like, yeah, I got into Rolfing because yeah, when I broke my back, like, I had the same thing. Like,
Yeah.
I was a mess. So I was kind of, seeing a lot of my own self in kind of some of the struggle you're going through and kind of getting it. I think that probably helped us kind of be, you know, I mean, that's probably why we became friends anyway. It's because we have similar ideas and stuff. But one of the things that you just said that really like I think is cannot be overlooked is like yeah like the skin is this very 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 important sensory organism like or yeah on our body like right every like I would argue that it might be the most important thing when it comes to like massage or any sort of
Hmm.
like touch oriented stuff we think about oh I need to break up scar tissue like you can talk to just about anybody who really works in like a hardcore medical way. Scar tissue, you have to break that up with like a scalpel.
Yeah.
You can't just like scrape it with a tool and massage it and it changes. To me, the change that you're seeing is really kind of, you're communicating with the nervous system in a very intimate way through the skin, and then that's changing kind of this, maybe the way that it's allowing the elasticity of the skin to work, so it's very much this
Hmm.
communicative process and less this kind of like I have this cold piece of Play-Doh that I need to like just smash out all the time, and so I mean that we could go down that path of like what does rolling do, what does stretching do, what does all this stuff do, and I would
Hmm.
say that most of the things that we've learned, in gym class or even from not medical professionals, but like rehab professionals is not exactly correct. Um, but what's more important to me, kind of what you're just mentioning, is this this reconnection, and so for me, when I go to get a massage or whatever, in my mind, it feels a good massage feels good. right? I mean, it's like
Yeah.
there's a lot of this information. So imagine the amount of positive kind of like, I have some clients who used to call it like ooey gooey, like, I don't really like those words because it's kind of weird to me, but that sense of like it does, it feels good to feel good. Like you go in and sometimes you just want someone to put hands on you in like an affectionate way, not in like a, emotionally affectionate, but like just kind of like you feel comforted, you feel safe, you feel,
Yeah.
and how
Hmm.
much, if you're having problem with your ankle because you just got out of a boot and all this kind of stuff, how nice does it feel to have someone kind of take care of it and really put in these nice like movements into your skin and into the kind of the underlying tissues that kind of changes the relationship with that piece of your body, because not only are you getting more information, so you're getting a bunch of feedback, from all of this contact and movement that they're doing to it, but it also has like a positive connotation. And then at the same time, you're allowed to talk about it, you're allowed to cry, you're allowed to like be pissed off and be like, this sucks. Like I'm so frustrated right now. If this ankle doesn't work out, like what's that going to do for my running? I'm not going to be able to hang out with my friends who are also runners. Like you're allowed to just kind of have this full on human experience while kind of taking in, like you're saying, very physical information. And to me, that's kind of
Mm.
the magic of any kind of body work or any kind of rehab where they're working on your body is kind of getting to be human all in that experience.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, because I mean, I guess it's kind of all these like topics that I could just wanted to discuss with you. But
Right.
I mean, this is just kind of this whole idea of like what is stress. And I think we define stress as like too often I think we define it as like objectively. I know I've fallen guilty to that, right? But like all of this stuff that like I feel like a lot of my injury recovery was subjective stress. It was like kind of like these emotions that I had like attached to them that led to even more stress and then even more what's the word I'm looking for, like even more like an injured quote unquote like part of me, like it would kind of like manifest itself in these other injuries because it was all of this other kind of psychological stress that I was putting on myself. And I feel like that's an important part of the work that you do, is to be able to kind of like I don't know, reconceptualize stress, and then how like how you're able to work through that and then get through these actually physical objective injuries, by dealing with all these like subjective injuries that are kind of like a part of it.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, to me, I think we need to look at stress. That's kind of, to me, is like the hot topic we should really be focusing on in a lot of our sport
Yeah.
training and rehab and all this kind of stuff. If we can get away from this sense of like, the body is this machine. I can say pretty confidently, no one has a machine for a body. And I've worked with some very high level Olympian runners. And I can tell you
Mhm.
that their body is not a machine. Like they're very capable of doing some very impressive things, like times and in certain events where I'm like, that's insane. I can't even imagine running that fast for that long. It's nuts, right? Some of the stuff you do, I'm like, how in the, like, I'll text you and I'm like, are you kidding me? Like I ran like 3 miles today and I'm like a little tired because I'm out of it. And you're like dropping, some crazy mountain run and, but, like I think we need to stop seeing ourselves as machines. We're not. We're not. We're biological organisms. We need to
Mhm.
be taken care of. We need to have time for restoration where we can literally repair the damage that's happened. Like one of the examples I like to give people is like imagine yourself as a house plant. If you're like this house plant's a machine, I'm just going to starve it of water because it's going to learn to. That might work a little bit depending on the plant you have, but if you just treat like these things like crap and don't give them food or water or sunlight or anything it needs, eventually it's going to start to get sick. And if you blame like,
Mhm.
oh, it must be stupid, it's not a good plant, or what, all these things that we could tell ourselves for why we're not succeeding, and so I work with a lot of athletes who are, they're high end, they're doing a lot of very intense stuff, and a lot of them are like, yeah, I mean, I don't, female athletes especially, like, well, I don't have a period. I haven't had a period for 3 years. And I'm just like, again, I don't want to sit here and mansplain this to you, but I gotta say it probably doesn't sound good, right?
Yeah.
Or I haven't, like I poop like once a week, and I'm like, what? You know, these kinds of things where, like when you get into it, it becomes very normalized, where it's like these normal bodily functions are kind of getting thrown to the wayside. Oh, I can't digest food very well. I can't eat. And they give you this list of things they can't eat. And some of those may be allergies, but some of them you're like, if you can't, eat like an apple, like that seems maybe like something may be up with their digestive system. And
Mm-hmm.
so what I'm kind of trying to point to is like if we look at ourselves as this very complex system of systems that's all kind of like interworking, and everything's going together, like it's like how do you isolate the nervous system? It needs all these other
Hmm.
things to do what it does, right? It needs a
Yeah.
vascular system for blood, like all this kind of stuff. So trying to label like this one aspect of our body and isolate it, it's kind of nuts. And stress impacts everything. So when you start to see all these like symptoms of a system in disarray, what it really tells me it's the stress load of life is too much. And as runners, we like to be like, oh, well, running is, like this good stress for me, or it's this good thing. And then work is this bad, like psychological stress, or like, you know, family stuff is bad stuff. But like,
Hmm.
I don't think your body and like your person in general is very good at discriminating between what's good and bad stress. It's just load. So if you're trying to
Yeah.
train for the 5K, like Olympic 5K, right? Or 5,000, e-
Yeah.
that's a lot of yes, very like physical stress associated with, stuff on your joints, just the general like your cardiovascular system's being taxed immensely, like you're saying, doing
Hmm.
intervals. But then like that can't be separated and boxed out and kind of like, well, it's different than, like my work stress or like my psychological stress or any of this kind of stuff. It's all stuff that your
Hmm.
body is having to withstand and not fall apart. Because that's all really stress is
Yeah.
like that kind of thing.
I mean, and this is like, I mean, as a coach myself, I mean, this is something that I think I deal with more commonly than anything. It's managing life stress. It's managing these other stressors. It's like I feel like people can go down a dangerous road. eh, if they're trying to adhere to a certain diet, train a certain number of hours, like, or run a certain number of miles, like they're attached to this, like, to this figure, or they have to perform this well, and then they have to, then they have family stress, they have work stress, like all of those things are stress, and like half of those are kind of like psychological too. And again, it like
Right.
kind of part of my work with you, I think it helped me kind of sort out what was psychological, like what I could control, and or better ways to like manage the psychological stress and then reduce overall load on my body, because that weighs something, even though
Totally.
the chemist side of me is kind of just like, Hillary, what are you saying? Quantify this.
Okay, okay. But let me I think this is a great point though. It's like, as we're talking here, the chemist side of you is, very much interested in, like, okay, when I have a thought though, there is a physical component to that, right? I mean, if I am thinking about, so I had, this is something I was kind of playing around with the other day. It was like, okay, when I'm looking on Instagram, for example, and I see someone's doing this really cool run and they're in this really awesome place, and I'm sitting in my office, so I'm getting FOMO, right? What
Hmm.
does, but what does FOMO? We can say it's psychological, but I was like, like I can feel something like almost like a gnawing sense of something in my stomach when I get FOMO, or like, like there's a physical component. Like our body registers these feelings, these sensations, even when I'm getting FOMO looking at, you running in France, and I'm like, that, are you kidding me? Like her life is sick. Like that's so sick. Oh, she's gonna eat a baguette after this. Like, no, screw this. Like, but so it's just not this, like abstract things that are happening in our head. There's always stuff it's having physical manifestations every single time in your body, and I think that's important. Like, if we can start to tap into that and feel that, we'll be like, there's that component, like, oh shit, like this is, like I'm a real human being and I have thoughts and feelings, and I'm not a a trainable machine who needs this exact diet and this exact thing to run this perfect race. It doesn't work like that. Hardly ever.
Yeah. Yeah, and actually I think it's so funny because it was quite painful, but not painful in the sense of like physical pain, like, ow, but like it was like this deeper, like kind of how you just described this, like, pit in your stomach or whatever sensation. It was this like deeper painful awakening of self that I had to go through in order to and it's a continual process in order to kind of like work through these injuries, because it's like, I thought it was okay, I need to deal with the physical thing and then I can get back to it and it'd be fine, everything will be fine, right? But like that's not how it works. And I think that's like kind of the interesting work of what you do and also what I do as a coach. It's like that's the actually fun part, is kind of like piecing these things together to figure out like, what actually is that makes us like ticking complete human beings, and that fostering that and taking care of that whole entity is quite difficult, but and it's not straightforward, but that's actually what leads to longevity and PRs and all these kind of like tangible things that we're looking for. It's kind of this like greater topic of like, happiness, I think, in a way. um and I feel like it's like, what people are trying to figure out, like get their life back together. um like, and they're focusing on this physical thing like an injury, but really it's kind of this more complex,
Right.
this complex situation.
It makes
Yeah.
me think of okay. So the first thing is like uh, I guess it's kind of tangential, but like just when people ask me like, okay, well, like I can't find a role for my area, or that's not really something I'm interested in. I'm like, oh, cool. Don't even focus on rolfing, right? I think it's great, but there's so much out there. Find a
Yeah.
coach, find a rehab professional who treats you like a human being and not just like they're not a mechanic. So if they talk out your body, like it's your body over there, and bring your body in, and I'm gonna, do some things here and this, and then get you out of here, you'd be fine. Go find someone
Yeah.
else. Find someone that's like who's willing to sit down, who has time to sit down with you and be like, okay, why is this important to you? And really
Hmm.
treat you like a human being, and the injuries and the pain, that kind of stuff is kind of like not secondary, but it comes with the territory of working with you first. So yeah, have someone, you can find someone who's just like, like, yeah, you have some goals, great. How can we get there? Great. Like, what are some issues that you have? What are this? That treat you like you deserve to be treated. And I think that's something that there's a lot of really good, I'm not just saying, there's a lot of good research out there that points to why that's important and how it positively affects outcomes. So it's not just me saying that because I'm a gooey guy, right? It's well the research out there is emerging. It's great. It points to yeah, being like a good human being first is like super important. And I don't know why takes us like loads of research and money to figure out something that's so obvious, but we do. Um, but
Oh
okay, so
man,
one of the
no.
things that really strikes me is like I don't know if it was your first or your second race that you did when you ran at in California at the what Broken Arrow,
Yeah, so
right?
technically that was my first race back. I did the vertical kilometer, which was technically my first race, and the next day I did the 50 kilometer.
Right. And okay, what struck
You
me
had to
so much
force
of
me to do that. I remember talking with you, and you were just like, "Hillary, just rip off the Band-Aid, freaking do it." And I was like, "No, I'm scared. I'm not ready."
yeah, but think about it, you'd had so much time and so many people were like, listen, like we literally can't find anything wrong with you. And like I'd watched you crush workouts, not even just like hobble through them and like that's fine, but like you annihilated some like very key workouts and made me look like an idiot in a lot of different runs that we done. And I thought at the time I was in pretty good mountain shape, like I still had some things I was working on, but I was like I'm confident I might be able to keep up. And I remember you dusted me up the side of like Shadow Canyon and Boulder, and I was just like, yeah, no, that's she's back. And you just didn't want to, but I think you had some of your coaches, me, some really key individuals who were like, okay, just try it out. Even like if you
Yeah.
just go. And we all kind of knew like there is no just like just go have fun. Just fun run this for you. It's like you'll get into it, you may do that for the first 10 minutes, you're like, nah, screw this. I gotta beat this person.
I
And sure
crush
enough,
these girls. Yeah.
yeah, like and that idea of, like really in I think I was excited to see how your perspective had changed. Less like I'm a machine. You'd clearly been shown that you are not a machine. You have a lot of soft spots that, if injured, you'd been shown that you were not a machine. You're human. But now you had this confidence. And I remember like looking at the finish photos, and you're just like bawling your eyes out. And to me, that was like such an important moment because I was like, oh my God, like this is not just like, oh, I want, like I got to like be in a race. It's like you got to do what you really enjoy doing, and I think that's the component to it that's so important, is that if you're not having fun, and running is fun is a very, very different word for a lot of different people, but you have to have that joy as like a human being, and have like connection and like purpose. You can't just be like, I've got to win this race, because that's then you just go down a
Yeah.
weird path where you're like addicted to it, and like you're just running for. So it's cool, like you got to, I think something you told me towards the end of our work was like, I don't feel like I'm the same person anymore, and I think that's a good thing, or something like that, where it was like very
Yeah.
touching to hear, and also to realize that like you'd kind of come through this like transformed and into like a kind of a different person.
Absolutely. And I think you love to hear that the most. It's like it's kind of like you said, I think I kind of thought about it as like energy in, energy out, like Hillary is robot, but like, it's like very
Yeah,
like scientific, right? But at the end of it, I think like literally that race in particular, like I had to like kind of like let go any like expectation of like, competition or results or these tangible kind of things, and really hold on to the emotional like process and the emotional journey. And that's why I wanted to get back to running. And I feel like if you embrace more of this kind of like holistic approach to injury recovery, and not even just if you're recovering from injury, like holistic approach of being a complete human, and the ups and downs that that always entails through a training cycle or whatever, you can kind of tap into these different experiences, and it can bring a whole new perspective and joy to the thing that you love doing. And I feel like that's where I became this kind of quote unquote like new person, where I was able to get in touch with more of an emotional side of things, and not just kind of like the hard numbers and from a training perspective of running. Um,
yeah,
and I mean, I think you already answered this question, but I mean, kind of just like for closing, because I think we like talked about a lot of different stuff, and there's a lot of good like tidbits to kind of continue to think on here. But like, what is your best advice for athletes who are recovering from injury, chronic pain, or just I don't know, like it doesn't even have to be from injury, but are just like trying to kind of get through these hurdles in life.
yeah. I think you kind of already put a little bit of an, like an answer to it, and so it's nice because now I can say that this is officially sponsored. This message is officially sponsored by at least one professional athlete. It's just to listen to yourself, right? Like understand that you are not a biomechanical machine. Like you have all of these very important components that are not, you can't cut them out and be like, okay, well, I'm not gonna like think today. Good luck. It's like you have all this stuff. So if you're looking to again, like, yeah, it doesn't have to be get better, it doesn't have to be faster. It can just be like, if you want to feel more human, if you want to uh, be healthier, in the sense of like a general wholeness and healthiness to your body, as in, go back to that house plant idea. It's how would you treat a house plant? Talk nice to it, give it what it needs as much as possible. Don't stress it until it's like withered and dead. And like, yeah, now it's really having an experience. Like, no, like treat yourself like that plant. Like, water it. Give it sleep. Don't drink too much booze. Drink enough to make you feel good. You know, have relationships with people, both, intimate ones and very like, like whatever you got. Like, don't store yourself away in kind of this like athlete's closet and only unpack yourself for like races or training, and then go back to like that thing. If you're crushing Netflix, and eating a very stringent diet, not talking to anybody, that's probably not a good idea. Like I want everybody to, I want everyone to have the same kind of joy that you have like when you run, and kind of I think that's why I point a lot of people in your direction is just kind of like, hey, look how much fun she's having, and she can take it seriously, but at the same time, she's got this level of humility and kind of she understands that she needs to be real first, and then an athlete kind of comes second. So that's probably my best advice that I could give.
Oh, oh man, this is like throwing me down memory lane. But,
Yeah.
but no, thanks, Levi. I mean, thanks so much for talking today. I mean, I feel like this is just a good reminder. It's just that, like, I mean, like you said, like we're not robots, and I think as much as I was looking for like a tangible solution when I walked through your door and like kind of like looking at Rolfing, it was like I came across something that I just didn't expect, and it was more of the whole like psychological piece and the that I still take with me today, even if I'm, whether I'm struggling through an injury or just kind of like a hard part in my life. It's like opening up that part of me um, to to kind of work through that whole process and kind of I think it might be scarier. At least it was scary for me at first. um, but, but it's like it's totally worthwhile, and I think it's a good reminder for everyone to be able to like that's a super important part, if not I would think a more important part of an athlete, of a person, is paying attention to kind of like the non-tangible, non-quantifiable parts of you.
I couldn't have
Um,
said it better myself.
but yeah, thanks so much for taking the time today. And I guess I can include your info on like in the cliff notes of this podcast. But if people are kind of, I know you're in school right now, but like where's some things that people can find more information about you or Rolfing in general?
Yeah, I mean, you can always for Rolfing, you can always look up the Dr. Ida P. Rolf Institute. It's in Boulder. There's a lot of good information on their website. For me, you can always find me, guys. The best way is on Instagram, Levity Rolfing. And feel free to
Mhm.
shoot me like a direct message, and if you have any questions, that kind of stuff. There's a lot of information on there, and I'm more than happy to direct people towards better information. I would say smarter people who have more comprehensive messaging and understand things a little better. So that's where they can find me.
Awesome. Well, thanks
Cool.
so much, Levi.
Yeah,
And
thanks for having me. I really appreciate being on
yeah,
here. It's kind of surreal, to be honest.
absolutely. Yeah, and you have a good day. Enjoy Oregon and hopefully see you soon in Colorado so we can crush some mountains together.
Yeah, I look forward to getting crushed by you for sure.